Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett. He's the publisher of the CorbettReport.com. He's also an editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he's worked and lived since 2004. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thanks for having me on, Jim. Always a pleasure to be here.
Is it still getting harder and harder to get money out of China, or are they just enforcing the rules they always had?
Well, I think that there obviously are government initiatives that are designed to clamp down on money getting out, capital getting out, and as we have seen in the past, that basically has knock-on effects in the Chinese economy itself, namely in the form of the housing bubble, as more people are spending the money that they have within the country, namely on real estate, which is becoming scarcer not only in the big cities, but also increasingly in some of the more peripheral areas. People are starting to look beyond Shanghai and Beijing for places to invest with the money that they can't get out of the country, which is why we're seeing actually slowing price gains in the major city centers, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, but we're seeing smaller places like Tangshan or Bengbu, other peripheral cities that are starting to gain more and more quickly. In fact, both of those places, Tangshan and Bengbu, had month-on-month gains of 2.2% in their real estate market in April. So they are starting to pick up. And the southeastern city of Foshan has recently started to crack down on real estate purchases because they're worried about a bubble developing in their own property market. So we are definitely seeing some effects of the fact that capital is having a harder time fleeing the country, so it's looking for places to invest within the country. And now the Chinese government, being the Chinese government, is trying to manage that response to the response of what they're doing in other areas of the economy.
Anything to encourage people to move into those giant empty cities?
In fact, there is some success on that front. I was just reading a story recently about how some of those cities are starting to fill up, and people who, for example, took jobs as security guards in giant mall complexes in these giant abandoned spooky cities where basically there were no shops, there was no one there, they were just hired to physically be there. It was very spooky. They're now saying, well, now actually people are starting to move into these places and they're starting to actually have people, and it's starting to fill up. So there is some actual movement that's happening on that, and some of these ghost cities are really not going to be ghost cities for very much longer.
Well, I'm sure the Chinese government is happy to see that.
Well, obviously this has been part of their plan, and this is part of the mass migration that is taking place, what is being called the largest migration in human history, which is the attempt to move hundreds of millions of basically peasants or former peasants from the Chinese countryside into urban centers. And that's, obviously they have these ghost cities ready and waiting. And if they happen to be in manufacturing areas, then so much the better for the people who are employing the manufacturing, very low-paid labor, we'll put it that way. So this is all going according to plan so far, and it's really a question of whether China can keep all of those balls in the air and manage to somehow keep the lid on property prices, even as they keep the lid on capital fleeing the country and all the other sectors of the economy that they're trying to keep a lid on or trying to control in various ways. It's very much a juggling act and very much a question of whether or not those balls will come crashing down at some point.
So really, their restrictions are working for them. That was the plan, wasn't it? Keep the money at home.
It is, but be careful what you wish for, because you may just get it. And China is starting to find out that there may be problems with money trying to find different outlets within the domestic economy that the Chinese government doesn't necessarily want, because it will drive prices up at home.
Right. And then, of course, you have the shadow economy, things the government doesn't want people to get into.
Of course, there's that, and you talk about the shadow economy and the financing that comes from the shadow banking industry as well, and a lot of shady schemes that are run throughout the quasi-financial institutions, giving these strange products, wealth management products and others that promise 10% returns that are basically giant Ponzi schemes that have been kept afloat for years now on the basis of easy credit. The spigot has been open and flowing for years and years now, and people have gotten used to that. And again, that's another part of the whole turnaround of the Chinese economy that the Chinese Communist Party is attempting to steer right now towards this shift inward into domestic consumption, towards the One Belt, One Road project, towards things that the Chinese government wants. Well, there's the other things they don't want, which is the people's reliance on this open spigot of easy credit that they're going to have to close at some point. And when and if they do, there's every sign that there's going to be significant pain and stress in that changeover.
How high has the overnight loan rate gone in some places?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do know that there have been moments of very hair-raising moments within the Chinese banking industry in the last several years. And I know that every time that the Chinese, the Bank of China attempts to tighten credit, there is a cash crunch crisis that people are literally having problems getting money out of their banks. And so they have to open the spigot again. So I know that it is very much a tightrope that they're walking, and every indication that something could come along to upset that apple cart. Something like, say, a significant credit downgrade. Oh wait, that happened, and the stock market took off. It actually went up in the wake of that credit downgrade. So very, very strange things that go on, but that's life in a controlled economy. You never know exactly what lever the technocrats and the controllers are going to be pulling or pushing, so you never know exactly how to position yourself in an economy like that.
Well, unlike so many countries and provinces and cities, Indonesia has just seen their credit upgraded, and they expect to attract $200 billion in investment because of that. Is that an optimistic thing or just realistic?
Well, obviously it's optimistic in the sense that this is an expectation. The headline that I see is Indonesia may see up to $200 billion in investment. I know there's a lot of interest right now in Southeast Asia and in some of the developing economies in Asia, basically people looking for those economies to transform in the way that we've seen, obviously, Japan and South Korea and some of the East Asian economies transition in decades past. People are thinking that now it is Southeast Asia's turn to do that. And it is certainly up in the air at this point whether that will happen, and that depends not only on the economics of the situation, as we know, but of course always there's the political intrigues and things that go on. But this could certainly be tied to what we're seeing in the region generally, which is a changeover of the economic status quo that's tied to the geopolitical status quo that sees China becoming more of a leader in the region and one that might put together some sort of alternative free trade regional bloc, and that might benefit countries like Indonesia or Malaysia or places like that that happen to be on key trading routes for the growing, would-be burgeoning Chinese trading empire. So there is certainly the opportunity there, and I understand why people are excited about that. But don't count your eggs before they hatch. These types of things have a funny tendency to develop into hype bubbles that may not live up to reality.
Could part of the optimism be that Indonesia is probably a country with a young population, whereas in Canada, for the first time, seniors outnumber children?
That's right. This is part of what is so exciting for a lot of investors about the Southeast Asian developing economies, is that the demographics are generally pretty much the inverse of what we see in more of the developed economies, certainly here in Japan and, as you say, in Canada and other places where the majority of the population are elderly, and that demographics is baked into the cake at this point, at least for the domestic population. So it really is an area where the developing economies, specifically in Southeast Asia, where a lot of people are looking, Thailand and in Indonesia and Malaysia, they do have that inverse where it is a predominantly young population, and of course that translates into a working force that's going to expand and is going to basically create a larger productive economy in the coming decades, and that's what people are looking forward to.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
I'm Brian Fowler, President of Blind Creek Resources Limited, listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, ticker symbol BCK. Blind Creek is focused in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. The company's key property is the Blend Project, one of the largest undeveloped lead-zinc-silver deposits in Western Canada, plus plans to advance the recently acquired, fully permitted historic engineer gold mine in the Atlan District of Northwestern BC. Check us out at blindcreekresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. The Chinese yen, how is it holding up against the U.S. dollar, the Canadian dollar, other currencies?
I don't know the latest rates or the latest moves on the yuan, but I, as far as I know, it is managing to at least maintain something like its trading band that it's been in recently. I haven't seen any major moves. I noticed there was a modest fall, what is being called a modest fall, and greater volatility in the yuan, but not a huge shift one way or another. So whatever it is that the PBOC is doing to fine-tune their pegging, it seems to be holding for the moment. And the last I saw, it was at around 6.7 yuan to the dollar.
A Chinese state counselor has stated that China does not want to be the only leader in the world. It would like to work with other countries to kind of guide everybody.
Well, this is it's interesting which quote you're looking at and which context it's in, because there are also the quotes of various Chinese officials saying that they want to lead the New World Order, which in this case, I think what they're talking about ultimately is this idea of the multilateral world that we're moving into, where there isn't the unipolar U.S.-dominated world. Clearly, we're moving past that moment, that world historical moment, into something more like some sort of multilateral world, and China obviously has a key seat at that table. And I think they've been openly arguing for that in various ways, certainly for the past decade. And one thing that you can certainly put your finger on is the fact that in the immediate wake of the 2008 financial meltdown, you had the Chinese, the Bank of China, the PBOC governor, openly advocating for the IMF's special drawing rights to ultimately replace the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. Even at that time, even 10 years ago, they were arguing for that. And that was before the Chinese yuan was added to the IMF special drawing rights basket, which, as we know, happened last year. So clearly, I think China is looking forward to a more multilateral world and are looking to take a prime seat at that table when it starts to take shape.
Any indication that China is going to follow up on an effort to build more bases around the world, the next big one perhaps being in Pakistan?
Yes, well, this is another adjunct towards their greater policy of basically extending geopolitical influence generally on the back of their trading influence, and that's obviously what, for example, the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor is about, which is part of the larger One Belt, One Road package that we've been talking about in recent weeks and months. But, usually on the back of tens of billions of dollars in investments, the Chinese government gets sweetheart deals and gets their businesses with a foot in the door in these regions. Another adjunct to that is the growing military influence of China. And of course, we've just seen they've officially commissioned their first natively built aircraft carrier, which at this point is sounds a lot more impressive on paper than I think it is in reality, but it is a step in the direction that we're seeing, which is an expansion of military influence. And so now, of course, we do have, at least the U.S. military is now openly musing about the possibility of growing Chinese military influence and a proliferation of Chinese military bases of some sorts, including, of course, in Djibouti, where China has a growing influence. So it is interesting to see the way that this is going to take shape and where these types of bases might spring up if China really does pursue this policy. One would assume it would be in places that are not only geographically important and geostrategically important, but also places that have a strong and established trading relationship with China.
China seems to be a whole lot more interested in Africa than many other countries are.
Yes, Africa has been a key part of China's expansion strategy economically for really much of the last decade and a half, at least. We can see the early unease from the U.S. and other players about China's growing influence in Africa, dating back at least a decade by this point. And this is reflected in the fact that, for example, China has paid for the African Union headquarters, which I'm going to forget where those headquarters are located, but wherever they are located, whichever African country they are located in, China actually paid for those headquarters as a gesture towards solidarity with Africa. And we saw the spectacle, for example, of Gaddafi before he went down, when he was still something of a if not ally of the West, at least someone that the West was working with in the middle part of the last decade. Well, at that point, he was starting to talk about how, well, actually China is probably viewed more favorably in Africa and will probably be the country that more African nations turn to as a partner in the developing global order, because China will work with people, and so as opposed to the U.S., which usually shows up with gunboats and tells people what to do, and we saw what happened to Gaddafi after making statements like that. So I think China's influence in Africa is significant. It is primarily business related at this point, but I think they want to follow that up with some sort of military presence that can ensure their trading routes, including very precarious route, or at least what could be a precarious route, shipping some of the oil and other products that they're shipping out of Africa through the port of Gwadar in Pakistan, where there just happens to be an independence movement that has support from certain U.S. senators and others, which is unusual when you start to look at it, until you realize that it is really geostrategically quite important and quite an important part of Chinese trading routes. So we're going to see more of those types of conflicts and things, I think, ramping up in the near future as things start to come to more of a head between U.S. and Chinese interests in Africa.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Turan property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, North Korea is standing there scolding the U.S. for pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. Is this an unusual turn of events, and will Trump see more of this from around the world?
Well, I'm sure the admonitions will come from a number of different sources, and when it comes from North Korea, it will obviously make headlines, but that's to be expected, I think. However, North Korea obviously looking to deflect, basically any sort of criticism from any of its other moves, including its latest, just hot off the press as we are speaking, North Korea firing multiple surface-to-ship missiles, according to South Korea's Yonhap news agency. So more missile testing and more bravado coming from North Korea. So, of course, they're going to I think, take moments to admonish the United States on a world stage in a way that will probably be viewed favorably by a lot of the people around the world.
Trump apparently is going to open his first Asian resort in, I believe, Bali. Are people concerned about that, or they just think it's something that's interesting?
Well, I believe Trump already has some sort of presence in real estate markets here in Asia, in East Asia. So I think there's already some sort of relationship, but the first resort might be, I suppose, something different. As to whether or not that will make a difference, whether people in Bali particularly care about it, maybe it will become a target for terrorism, of course, because obviously being a sitting U.S. president makes it quite different than just a regular economic transaction. So there's always, I think, that possibility that we'll see conflation of the Trump brand with the United States generally, and then it becomes a sort of target. So there are a lot of factors that play into this. As to whether people in the region particularly care about Trump resorts, I mean, I think that remains to be seen. I assume this will be more for people from abroad coming to vacation in Bali.
The overall view of Trump in Asia right now?
Confusion, I would say, is probably the norm, but I don't think that's limited to Asia. Basically, the sense is no one knows, even when Trump actually says something about a subject, no one has any idea whether or not that will actually be implemented in reality. So, but again, I think that's pretty much the same with everyone all around the world. So at this point, I think people are just trying to make the most of it that they can, and it looks at this point like China has quite successfully navigated whatever situation it was in at the beginning of the Trump presidency. They seem to be actually developing something of a closer relationship to the United States than many expected, and perhaps that is predicated on what happens with North Korea and whether China can keep North Korea in line or will respond to these missile threats and things like that. So there may be some quid pro quo, but I think at any rate, people are tentatively trying to figure out what kind of relationship they can have with the United States under Trump.
Trump does seem to like people who are strong-arm leaders, and I suppose he really wishes he didn't have a thing like a constitution he has to follow.
That is the sense that we get, and that, of course, confirmed a few weeks ago with his exchange with the Filipino president, Duterte. So we know that there's clearly some affinity going on between Trump and a number of people looked at as strong-arm leaders around the world, and I think that's probably the way that, yes, he probably would like to see himself, and we'll see how this all plays out with regards to the new FBI head and whether that will be approved and all of that. There's a lot of internal politics taking place right now. But yes, that's, I think, one of the impressions that people have from abroad, at any rate, of the U.S. presidency right now, is that it certainly does look like someone who really wants to take more of that strong man, strong arm position in world politics.
How serious is the Islamic militant uprising in the Philippines?
That certainly remains to be seen. It's interesting that we have an Islamic State presence in the Philippines at all, and it's interesting to look at the timing of this, just as Duterte is certainly raising a lot of rhetoric and talk about moving away from the United States in its relationship with the U.S. and towards China and Russia, and suddenly ISIS shows up on, making a threat in the Filipino land space. That's interesting and should provide some pause for thought. At this point, there really is some issues that the Filipino government is dealing with, and I think it really is a genuine threat at this point. I think the real question is why now, and why is it showing up just as Duterte is looking to pull away from the United States?
Right, and then we have ISIS claiming credit for an attack on the government buildings in Tehran as well.
That's exactly right, which of course throws a significant monkey wrench in the works of the people who want to conflate Islamic State and extremism generally with Iran, like Trump, of course, who singled out Iran as one of the leading proponents of terror in the world on his recent Middle East trip. Well, but they're being attacked by ISIS, and they're fighting ISIS in Syria and Iraq. That doesn't seem to square with what we're being told. So that's one of those moments that hopefully will make a few more people actually look into what the relations are between various people in the region and who's fighting whom, because it is not quite so straightforward as simply quote-unquote Muslim extremism, as if this is all just one big pot and we can just throw all of the different nations and peoples into it.
Well, take a look at World War II. Apart from the Pacific, it was Christian countries fighting Christian countries. Yeah.
Indeed, and exactly right. I mean, it doesn't fall along strict religious sectarian lines like that in all cases, and even this Sunni Shia split that is often talked about with regards to what's happening in Islam doesn't necessarily make sense when you look at the rather startling development this week of Qatar and being basically cut off diplomatically and even in terms of airspace usage by Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and UAE. I mean, it's quite a dramatic development and potentially signals the breakdown of the GCC, the Gulf State Cooperation Council. So very interesting moves that are taking place, and they are ostensibly on the same side of that Sunni Shia split. It's just that Qatar may be a little too friendly with Iran, and they may be on the side of the Muslim Brotherhood, and so there are a lot of things that go into these determinations, and it's not. It certainly isn't. Those kinds of nuances usually aren't taken into account when presidents and others are giving speeches opening new extremism centers in Riyadh.
Yes, and I always say to people, well, why are you talking politics? This is supposed to be a show about economics, money, and investment. Well, if you're planning to invest in a silver mine in the Philippines or whatever kind of product comes out of there, if militants are fighting there, that's going to affect your pocketbook.
Well, a very good example of that would be Qatar and the Qatar stock market tumbling 7%, of course, on the back of these Arab nations cutting ties. Geopolitical events and in economic events are completely intertwined.
James, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. On YouTube, we're Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.